That recording thing you just got, I'm recording this just to let you all know. We're recording this because I sometimes use it in my social media as well as on Olelo. I do regular shows on Olelo and share what I'm up to with folks. So I hope that's okay with all of you. So if you guard your comments on that basis, I don't happen to do that, but that's a notification to everybody that that's what we're doing. That will be the use of. We're not sure we're going to do it, but usually I like to have the raw material so that I can do it if I want to. I think this is something that the public would be interested in, or at least some. All right, why don't we go ahead? Again, good morning and a really fond aloha to everybody. I want to thank each and all of you up front for participating in this, my inaugural Renewable Energy Roundtable. I have talked with most of you from time to time individually on aspects of energy in Hawaii and in our country and renewable energy in particular. But for me, this is an opportunity to gather everybody together and just have kind of a group discussion to catch up, to compare notes. There are a lot of purposes that I want to make out of this particular roundtable, and I hope it's valuable to you as well. I already mentioned that I'm recording this for Olelo and other purposes. I want to introduce the people on my staff that many of you have interacted with. I've got Wisdom Matsuzaki here, who is an assistant in my DC office. Wisdom is from Hawaii and is captured in the DC environment for a while at least. Matthew Bernard there is a Navy lieutenant who is a Department of Defense fellow assigned to my office. I take fellows into my office to foster the relationship between Congress and the military. And so Lieutenant Bernard, who flies helicopters off of aircraft carriers for a living, is spending a year in my office and learning all about renewable energy. So those are the folks from my office on the phone. I want to extend some special mahalos before I do some introductory remarks. First of all, Senator Glenn Mackay and Representative Nicole Lowen, who chair the State, Senate, and House committees with jurisdiction over renewable energy. I really appreciate your participation and leadership at the state level in creating really an incredible foundation that many people across the country and the world look up to, and I appreciate your partnership here. I want to especially thank the Hawaii State Energy Office. Kirsten Turner is on the phone for the Energy Office for your participation today, and you have really helped me to put this roundtable together. We appreciate that, as well as just been really indispensable in terms of my own needs and requests for information and taking suggestions in Congress, especially on my Appropriations Committee, which I'll get into. I appreciate your partnership. And finally, somebody that we all know, Dr. Richard Rochelo, who is presenting today for all of your incredible years of service at the UH Manoa, as well as the Natural Energy Institute. Really appreciate that. And then we have many members of the renewable energy industry and other state officials and county officials joining us together. And I really appreciate your collective experience and hope that we all benefit from your insights today as we chart the next generation of our own renewable energy future. Big picture, of course, our Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative and our goal of reaching 100% renewable by 2045 is the first for the United States, remains that, and is really the gold standard throughout our country. I was on the phone yesterday with the Consular Corps of Hawaii, who are the representatives of many foreign countries that are stationed here in Hawaii, and this particular issue came up that Hawaii was leading in this area. Much interest in what we are doing, and I think that's a good sign. Obviously, we've come a long way since 2008 when we set out that standard. We're up to what, 30% now, and as we all know, some islands on some days are close to or at 100% for brief periods of time, which is really quite an accomplishment. A lot of people contributed to this over time. We all have the responsibility to take those contributions forward and get there. And I think we all know that there's a lot of work still to be done. For me, what this roundtable is all about is a couple of different purposes. First of all, as your federal representative in Congress, my goal is to understand exactly what your perspectives are as to renewable energy in Hawaii, and try to refine the areas where I can contribute to your efforts in Washington, D.C. So that's my kuleana, is the federal government. You've got the state government, the county government, the educational system, the industry. Where I fit into that is at your federal government level, which does have a major role in all of this, either through federal programs, federal regulations, federal policy, but federal spending in particular. And so one of my subsets here is to make sure that I'm on the right track in terms of my appropriations contributions here, where our federal government spends a great deal of money in renewable energy. That is on a yearly cycle. This is, even though we haven't settled fiscal year 2022 yet, which is about to start on October 1st, I'm already working on fiscal year 2023, because by the beginning of next year, I will be fully into the appropriations process for FY 2023. So it's a long lead time, and the better organized I am and the better partnerships and relationships I've developed with you, the better the product is going to be. So that's my first goal here. And my second goal here is simply to kind of sit back and try to listen to where you all are and what your questions are, so that I can, again, figure out ways that I can contribute other than strictly through appropriations. So that's my general goal here. I certainly want to answer your questions, and there's time for us to do that. So after a few introductory remarks, where I'll just lay out some big picture items on my side of things, we're going to hear from the Hawaii State Energy Office about the progress of the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. We're going to hear from Representative Lowen as to the state legislature's work. And Dr. Rashalo will give us some updates from the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, I think. And then, of course, I want to leave plenty of time for questions and observations and discussion. And we hope to have a good, solid product by the end of an hour and a half to 2 hours. A couple of big picture comments about where I fit in and where Congress fits in here. There are three major areas that are front and center immediately, as in the next couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, very intense time for Congress. Number one is our federal appropriations process. Number two is the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package, and I'll get into that. And then number three is what is often referred to as the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. I'll try to give you some updates and where this all might fit into that, and then go to your questions. So let's start with appropriations. These are the annual appropriations out of our federal government, about $1.5 trillion, all discretionary funding by the federal government every year. So discretionary means we actually do fund it every year and make decisions on where that money is going to go. To distinguish it from non-discretionary, which would be funding that will flow automatically, for example, Social Security benefits, veterans benefits, which are large in and of themselves. But the Appropriations Committee in the House and the Appropriations Committee in the Senate run the annual appropriations process, and I'm on the House Appropriations Committee, and Senator Schatz is on Senate Appropriations. So we routinely do tag team on this across the Hill and keep in very close contact with his office. Congressman Kahele and Senator Hirono are fantastic on these issues as well. They contribute on many of the authorizing committees to the policy side of the equation. So it's a good, solid team to take advantage of right now in this particular area. In the appropriations area, we fund in 12 separate bills that cover 12 separate areas of the government in categories. So for example, we have a Department of Defense appropriation bill, a Department of Agriculture appropriation bill, a Department of Health and Human Services, and et cetera, Foreign Affairs. Renewable energy enters into many more of these than you might expect. For example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture runs renewable energy programs that are often overlooked in my estimation, in terms of the availability of federal funding here. And so that's definitely an area for us to investigate if you're interested. The Department of Defense runs major renewable energy programs because the DoD is interested from a strategic perspective in reducing its dependence on fossil fuels to include primarily foreign fossil fuel sources. That makes a lot of sense. And so you will find a lot more activity in the DoD on renewable energy and a lot more opportunities for federal funding in the DoD, often in partnership with the state governments. And so you will really find pockets of renewable energy funding, whether it be R&D or implementation, throughout federal government. And we can work with each and all of you on those potential pockets. But clearly the big one in the room is the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy, which is funded together with water development. So really the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which has a little bit of a piece of renewable energy, but we're really focused here on the Department of Energy itself and on its programs. The Department of Energy this year in our FY 2022 appropriations bill was funded at $53 billion. Which actually is one of the smaller departments. That's a whole nother story, but nonetheless, 53 billion to focus in these areas and to accelerate our own efforts is nothing to sneeze at, and we should try wherever we can to identify and access those programs for our own needs here in Hawaii. There are a couple of areas that are particularly relevant from a clean energy perspective, whether you want to do R&D or technology development or areas of renewable energy or green jobs. Obviously, the climate crisis is front and center in all of this. But just for a little bit of a flavor of some of those areas, our bill funds energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, focusing on clean technologies at about $3.7 billion. We included in the bill about $10 million for the Energy Transitions Initiative, which is focused very much on island and remote communities to develop resilient energy systems. So that's funding that clearly, if we can fund that program, we're going to have a good solid shot at that, since it fits our profile and what we want to accomplish here. We actually have a couple of projects already that are funded through this program. One is an electrical infrastructure resiliency initiative here in Honolulu, and then we also have some alternative and autonomous mobility options on Kauai. But I think there are opportunities to increase our participation in this funding program. We have about $375 million in the bill for weatherization assistance, which is a significant increase over funding for FY 21. Certainly we have opportunities to weatherize our older homes. We often think about weatherization as a kind of a continental US thing, but we're eligible for that money too, and we should go out and try to access it. We have $600 million for advanced research projects, energy, which is a significant increase as well. And that's focused on rapidly developing technologies that are capable of significantly changing the energy sector. So those moonshots, so to speak, and we certainly can have a piece of that. And then finally, just to mention one other area, we have about 75 million specific to geothermal energy technology and the next generations of geothermal. Those are just a couple of areas in the Department of Energy bill, just to kind of indicate some of the areas that we can access. Clearly, of course, what we want to do is to identify all the programs that we can access to advance our own clean energy initiative, and then to tap into them. I say all of this just not to get into the weeds on it necessarily, but to illustrate the availability and the need for us all to coordinate on what these programs are and how to get to them. In terms of the appropriations process, just quickly, my office is already open to your requests for specific appropriations. You will find that on my website at case.house.gov. There is an appropriations page here. Actually, I take it back. I'm not sure if I actually have it up yet, but I certainly will have it up shortly for FY23. We will want to work with you along those lines, but it's not too early for you to contact us to start talking about some of these areas. Many of you are very astute already at how to work with your federal delegation towards appropriations requests, and whether you already know what to do or kind of a beginner at it, just contact us and we'll try to work with you on it. Let me talk about the bipartisan infrastructure package, which is here in the Wisdom has just posted the link to my page on appropriations requests, which I guess it is up already for FY23. So my staff is ahead of me on that. Let me talk about the bipartisan infrastructure package, which is one of the two major initiatives out of President Biden in terms of his Build Back Better agenda. This is what we refer to as physical infrastructure, so more traditional infrastructure, whether it be, roads, bridges, water pipes, harbors, airports, infrastructure as we usually think about it, but with a much broader spin to it. For example, this bill has significant funding for broadband, which I think we would all agree is critical, especially to our Hawaii, and has a role in clean energy for sure. But also really to try to tackle our nation's energy grid, which is in its own stage of deterioration, including here in Hawaii. So this bill, which we are making every effort to bring to a vote in the U.S. House, it's already passed the Senate. If we pass it in the House, it goes straight to the president, it gets signed. We estimate that out of that $1 trillion of infrastructure, there would be somewhere in the range, this is Senator Schatz's analysis, of $2.3 billion to Hawaii for infrastructure related assistance from the federal government over a 5-year period. Much of that would be eligible to address and to supplement and to really boost the clean energy initiative here in Hawaii. So my efforts are devoted to try to get that bill over the finish line. We have a vote that's supposed to be held on September 27th. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure that that happens, because I think it's important for us to get this done. Some of the areas that are particularly interesting to Hawaii, I think, are $73 billion to update our nation's electricity grid, $7.5 billion for low emissions buses and ferries, and then $7.5 billion for electrical vehicle charging stations. The electric grid would be the largest single investment by our federal government in clean energy transmission, really in our history. It also includes an interesting initiative to create a specific grid development authority. So really a federal coordination of the grid across the entire country. And I think that could definitely help us here in Hawaii. I mean, the buses are things that I think we can all understand as well. But the point of the observation is that this is really a once in a generation opportunity for us to add to what we're trying to accomplish here in Hawaii. It is relatively discretionary. So if we do pass that bill, and if that money does start coming here, it's definitely something that we need to be very, very cognizant that this is not going to go on forever. This is a one-time infusion in our infrastructure, but also to make sure that our collective priorities are devoted to the right purposes. Finally, let me mention the reconciliation package, which is the second part of President Biden's initiative. This is referred to as reconciliation because that is a very obscure process that can be used sparingly in Congress, only one, maybe 2 times per year. And the net effect of it is to bypass the Senate filibuster. So simple majorities in the House and the Senate. That bill is often called our social infrastructure bill, which encompasses a number of social programs ranging from the child care tax credit to the extension of the Affordable Care Act to expansion of Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. It is by no means a done deal. It's going to be a very, very difficult lift to get it over the finish line. I think something will come over the finish line, but what it's going to look like or when that's going to happen, it's hard to guess right now. One area that I think does impact us all specifically in terms of the reconciliation bill is that it will likely, at the end of the day, include a huge investment in a variety of climate change related initiatives. Senator Schatz, as you all know, is very much the leader of this in Congress. As the chair of the Commission on Climate Change in the Senate, he's taking the lead on all of these areas. This would be in the range of hundreds of billions of dollars, the largest investment in climate change resiliency and other programs throughout our country. And that would be a major opportunity because, like the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it would accrue to the benefit of Hawaii. And I think we all need to just track that as well. Okay, I talked too long. Apologies for that. I am going to conclude there and just say again, really appreciate your participation, your partnership, your input. I can really use your guidance. And I will do whatever I can together with our other delegation members to advance our mutual goals. All right, I am going to, I can take, why don't I do this? I'm just gonna kind of go on the fly on the schedule here. Can I take one or two questions? And then I wanna move on to our other presenters, and then we will have time at the end to come back for questions. So just raise your hand and I'll try to recognize you if you have any questions right now. Otherwise, we can move along. Okay. See, I don't see any, so I will take that as an indication that we will move along. I am happy now to recognize the Hawaii State Energy Office and Kirsten Turner, who of course has a lot of familiarity as she's worked in Congress for a while. So it's always, from my perspective, it's always great to have, folks at the state and county and local level that have been in our congressional delegation or in Congress, because it's just easy to kind of cut to the chase on what can be done from a federal perspective. So Kirsten, over to you.
Thank you, Congressman Case. I appreciate it very much, and particularly your collaboration on so many levels over the years. And I also want to thank our state legislators, our representatives and senators that are here this morning, because the collaboration has also been excellent this past session since I've been at the State Energy Office. I have a lot to go through. I'm going to talk very quickly, and then I'm very open to questions at the end. I'm going to try and set a stage for you. And so I'm going to share some slides. And if you'll bear with me for a second, if you will let me know as soon as you can see the PowerPoint. Can you see that?
I can see it.
Great. Let me put it in sharing mode. There we go. Okay. Let me just begin by giving you a little overview of our mission, because this is something that people forget, is that our mission includes helping achieve a resilient, decarbonized economy. So it's an economy-wide focus, and it includes clean transportation, as Senator Lee, who's present, is well aware. So I also want to share our priorities, since the increased number of severe weather events and the pandemic that we've had to put much more of our resources into our number one priority, which is energy assurance and resiliency. And we have our head of that sector in the State Energy Office, Chris Yonkers, is here with us. And so he'll be happy to see this as our number one priority. I just want to point out, we also have community engagement and stakeholder engagement and data analytics that are a big focus, because those all support the other priorities in our office. And we can't get to every corner of the economy without reaching out to all of the stakeholders, which means all energy consumers. Energy assurance and resiliency is our top priority. And I just put some of the highlights here of the kinds of things that Chris's outfit within our office is focusing on. But most importantly is that we provide the energy emergency response function. And so as part of that, he's doing hazard mitigation, securing independent critical energy infrastructure, planning for critical community clusters, and mapping potential renewable energy microgrids. That is going to come in handy as we look at the overview of our economy. You asked me to give an overview of the whole energy ecosystem and some of the facts and figures. So the DBED data book just came out a few weeks ago, and our staff is just beginning to update the Hawaii facts and figures. So those are not out yet. That will be on our website. We expect a better total energy ecosystem picture with 2020 data. But meanwhile, on the left, this diagram shows the breakdown of total energy sources, including transportation, with petroleum accounting for 84%. And the right-hand diagram I thought was interesting because it demonstrates that petroleum and coal made up the majority of all cargo imported into Hawaii, and the last figure we had was 2016. But you can see what an important part of our overall economy it is. The energy ecosystem diagram I'm going to show you in a moment is corresponds with this barrel of oil, and you'll see the correlation in a second, but I want you to focus on the fact that the majority of this barrel of oil goes to transportation. Okay, and if you look at the barrel of oil at the bottom of this diagram, this Sankey diagram that shows energy production and consumption in Hawaii, created by the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. I'm going to show you as a means of orienting you. I'm going to click through some changes here because, first of all, transportation at the bottom to demonstrate that the orange portion of electricity goes up through the orange box at the top. And let's move nuclear out, which I've done. And let's bring natural gas down to its size, which I've done. And you can see the transportation marine is divided between marine, ground transportation, makes up a whopping 27%, and air, a whopping 34%. Notice that bioenergy is going mostly to transportation, with some of the biomass that goes into electricity generation by this thin green line. And energy used is on the right-hand side. So if you go from left to right, you can see all the production sources. The majority of the renewable energy is going into the electricity generation. And the consumption is on the pink boxes on the right: residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation. So those represent the energy used. And the big gray bar is wasted energy. Does everybody see this okay?
Yep.
Okay. So note that the lion's share of that oil is consumed by the transportation sector. Our renewable portfolio standard for electricity sales otherwise referred to as our 100% renewable energy goal, and the PUC's performance-based rate-making docket just covers the electricity sector, which you can see accounts for a smaller proportion of our petroleum use. Our energy portfolio standard focuses on the consumption or demand side of our energy ecosystem. So Hawaii's goals focus on energy efficiency and electricity, which we learned from the collapse of transportation demand during COVID-19 from the beginning, is subsidized by the transportation sector. So when the jet flights stopped coming, that huge portion of the barrel of oil on the bottom, the demand for that collapsed. The price of electricity went up because I'm going to let Chris and Maria share and answer any questions you have with regard to that, but it was a very interesting docket that went to the PUC, and maybe Rick will cover some of that as well. But it really was an eye-opener on how transportation subsidizes electricity for our economy. So the other important element to focus on here is that coal energy ends in 1 year and will be replaced mainly by solar battery storage and fuel oil, plus a little bit of electricity, fuel oil for electricity. And we also anticipate hydrogen as it comes online will come from various sources and have various uses. Electrification of transportation for passenger cars and trucks, inter-island flights, and shipping will need to be fueled by all these renewable energy sources, including renewable natural gas, which Hawaii Gas is now producing from Honouliuli wastewater treatment plant methane. Larger vehicles, long haul air. Let's see if I can get to that. Yeah. And marine will require renewable fuels, bioenergy, and/or hydrogen, and other innovations like perhaps direct air capture to fuel transportation. Perhaps more federal funding will be available through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, particularly renewable aviation fuels. So with that, I want to talk about progress in these key areas. Let's look at first that the Hawaii State Agency's electricity use in 2019, if you look at the top box on the right, was 17.5% less than it was in 2005, which was the baseline year. 1.2 billion will be saved in electricity costs over the life of the contracts. HSEO is the elected chair of the Hawaii State Building Code Council, whose mission is to unify the state and county building codes, and the updated International Energy Conservation Code, the IECC, is an effort to unify all of those codes. And the State Building Code Council tries to look at that and update and make any amendments for Hawaii, and do that streamline between the state and the counties. So the updated energy code is projected to the IECC, the 2018, is projected to save ratepayers 1.4 billion by 2040. And our Hawaii Green Business Program that Maria oversees, Maria Tomei is also online here with us, the manager of our EERE branch, the director of it, has worked with, and that branch has worked with over 100 businesses, organizations, and events since 2004. And then last year's cohort saved over 1.1 million kilowatt hours and 91.6 million gallons of water as well. Other progress is in 2020, if you look at the electricity sales on the red box, surpassed 36% from renewable energy. 90 plus renewable projects are now operating, 618 megawatts of renewable generating capacity. And this is going to be updated with the new energy facts and figures. And then, of course, we have, I'm sorry, wrong way. We have over 16,000 EVs statewide and nearly 800 public EV charging ports. So let's look at the energy efficiency for state buildings. If you just look at the graph on the bottom, you can see the tremendous progress on many of the state buildings. We continue working with cohorts of state buildings to advance that. And our renewable portfolio standard, as you mentioned, Representative Case, KIUC is on average almost 68% and on some days 100%. The HECO companies, Hawaiian Electric, I should say now, is averaging 34.5% RPS. So this shows the renewable electricity generation by source. Of the 36% electricity sales from renewable energy in 2020, distributed PV made up the lion's share, followed by wind and utility scale PV shown with the orange line. And geothermal, as you can see, dropped precipitously as a result of the volcano eruption on Hawaii Island, but with the reopening of those wells, that will be increasing again. Hydro will be increasing with KIUC's new West Kauai Pump Storage Hydro Project, and AES is in our group. That's anticipated to meet more than 25% of the island's electricity needs, moving Hawaii beyond the 80% RPS of renewable energy generation. Biofuels currently accounts, as you can see on this diagram, for only about 1% of the renewable energy picture, with Pacific Biodiesel supplying about 5 million gallons per year of fuel for Hawaiian Electric's neighbor islands. They also provide fuel for passenger vehicles and medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets for the city and county of Honolulu, including the bus, as well as at least one Young Brothers tugboat. There's clearly great potential for diesel fuel switching with biodiesel with little cost differential at the pump. So this shows us overall renewable energy generation in Hawaii. You can see here that distributed and utility scale PV accounts for 62% of all renewable energy generation in Hawaii. And the market, as you see, determines the lowest cost resource, which also benefits the ratepayers. Biomass is mostly H-power that burns trash, and the Kauai Green Energy Project that burns trees and its combustion plant. In 2020, there was enough renewable electricity generated in Hawaii to power the equivalent of all homes, plus 6% of non-residential electricity use. So some of the renewable energy that's available from solar, wind, and geothermal facilities isn't shown here since it's wasted. It's curtailed by the utility since there is no use for it at the time it's generated. So as renewable generation increases, the importance of using that curtailed energy will become even greater. Approaches such as the advanced rate design and smart grid performance incentive mechanisms and others are demand response and energy storage are and can be further demonstrated in Hawaii with great effect and great benefits, since our grids are small and not able to export excess electricity to other areas. So any federal funding for that will be a model for the rest of the country. And then finally, I want to close out here almost with Hawaiian Electric Stage 1 and Stage 2 projects. So as you can see, the majority are on Oahu. Some of these developers are in our roundtable. Thank you very much. There are currently 20 projects anticipated statewide, representing major additions of solar plus storage on every island. Stage 1 and 2 RFPs for Hawaiian Electric included 950 megawatts. I'm not even going to go through this because a lot of this has changed, but it's basically going to help move Hawaiian Electric to about a 50% RPS and higher on Maui and Hawaii Island. This includes about 250 megawatts of what Hawaiian Electric refers to as shared solar, or what is in the legislation has been referred to as community-based renewable energy. As you know, KIUC is going to move to over 80% renewable energy with its pump storage hydro project by 2025, and Hawaii Island could reach similar RPS levels. The governor formed the Powering Past Coal Task Force, which our chief energy officer leads, to provide a common operating picture for all parties involved, many of whom are on this roundtable, including relevant state agencies and some other non-governmental stakeholders to get a common operating picture of the overall progress to replace the electricity currently provided by Oahu's coal plant. It's proved to be an excellent forum to help everyone understand where we are, where we're going, and what some of the potential bottlenecks are. And lastly, here's it just is moving on its own. Here's a picture in 2020 of where the total energy generation is, the percent of RPS, and the cost per kilowatt hour. And I'm going to I'm happy to share these slides, by the way. And I just want to mention as I turn this over to Representative Lowen that we also provide clean transportation support. And these are the 3 bills that are really going to advance electrification of transportation. And our office has been providing back of the house, behind the scenes support to be able to help identify what some of the transportation goals should be. And also some of the, excuse the pun, vehicles for helping with that transition, and bringing aboard a data scientist in our office has really helped to be able to break down a lot of the information, make it much more palatable and usable and shareable across agencies and the public sector to be able to understand ways in which we can transition more quickly. And this is a great waffle diagram that shows each car represents 100 vehicles. And this diagram will enable the implementation of Act 74 by helping state agencies see the number of vehicles they have in the fleet, the age of the vehicles, and when we can transition those out. And then this also helped us work with the Department of Transportation to negotiate a vehicles as a service contract and identify what the cheapest way to go was for adopting electric vehicles for the state fleets. And there's been a lot of controversy out there about Teslas being rolled out from state agencies, but those proved to be the lowest vehicle mile traveled contract when you roll in the charging infrastructure, the maintenance and everything. So just wanted to give a shout out to that, and I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. That's a lot to absorb, but incredible work. I'd love a copy of the slides myself to just kind of digest it all. Couple of maybe a few questions. I'll just take the prerogative and ask a few questions. Well, first of all, I did want to recognize that we have other state legislative partners on the line, or who are going to come in and out besides Rep. Lowen and Senator Wakai. I saw Representative Matayoshi, Martin, Rep. Peruso and Senators Lee, Riviere, and Bisalucha. I think I got everybody that I saw in one way, shape, or form. I really thank you for your partnership as well. Let's see, Kirsten, so one quick one and then one broader one. When you talked about the consumption of energy, and you showed air transportation as I think 34%, if I'm not mistaken. Was that limited to inter-island air transportation, or is that actually adding in all airlines?
All airlines.
Okay, so obviously that changes the statistic pretty significantly if what we're dealing with is energy consumption inside the state itself. If we're rolling out, and I'm not saying we should, I'm just trying to get my thinking straight on it. If we're rolling out international flights in and national flights in, then that's a little bit of a different profile for that, right? I mean, it's still a matter of converting out of fossil fuel based airlines. I'm not getting at that. I'm just trying to get my facts straight there.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so now that you've been on the Congress side and you know what I've been talking about in terms of federal support, federal funding, and you're over on the state energy side now, are there areas that you believe that we're just completely missing the boat on, or that we need to pursue a little bit more on the federal support, federal funding side, where we have real solid shots at significant federal, investments in our efforts here?
Well, I would point out that one of the areas we need to invest more in is renewable aviation fuels. And that's a real potential. And our legislators did propose an aviation fuel task force for Hawaii in the last session. We didn't have the bandwidth to be able to stand something like that up. So of course, we are always looking for more state energy program formula funding, which we anticipate is going to come with with the new budget. But the opportunities are tremendous. The technology is there. What's needed is to get over that hump to commercialize, to make aviation fuel more economically viable, but it's been tested and proven. And there are others, particularly Maria, who could comment in more depth, but that I think is a missing element, and that this could be a great test case, particularly because you mentioned inter-island transportation and electrification. I mean, inter-island flights and electrification of inter-island flights is already being demonstrated in Hawaii.
I guess I'm just trying to translate that, because renewable aviation fuel is really a national, international effort. We would benefit from it here for sure. I guess we could do some kind of a demonstration project inter-island that we might be able to justify specific funding to Hawaii for that purpose, and that's worth us looking at, to my staff. I was more thinking about, I guess I was thinking about specific Hawaii unique projects, whether R&D or, I'm always looking for the things that we can best demonstrate in Hawaii as a matter of not only our own uniqueness, for example, what I talked about earlier in terms of small island energy resiliency, use dependence, or for that matter, niche areas that if we can mix and match federal programs to those niche areas, it's pretty certain that we're going to get that funding.
There's tremendous opportunities for electrification of transportation, and the Drive Electric Hui in Hawaii has, and Chris leads that up for our office. Ben Sullivan, who's on here, is part of that as well.
Okay.
So that is a tremendous opportunity, particularly to ramp up the charging infrastructure and roll that in with the demand response and other initiatives that I mentioned with regard to the opportunities for energy efficiencies.
Right.
So there's you can roll every department of the DOE programs into that, but I would invite others to comment on that. Maria? Or Ben? Or Senator Lee even?
I would just, this is Chris Schenker, Hawaii State Energy Office. I just reiterate a little bit of what we're talking about here. Electric aviation, essentially the, kind of commuter flights between islands is something that's emerging, and we're uniquely situated here. In terms of some of the resiliency things that are going on in the various programs, I'll say that, islands and resiliency, we are a great demonstration. We've been working on building resilient infrastructure and communities, the FEMA program, and we've had some of the sort of microgrids going through there, as well as resiliency hubs. One of the things we're working good with FEMA, and I'm really glad that they've been open to looking at energy. But that's one thing that we're really trying to push over, is no energy projects were funded out of BRIC's program last year. And so we're looking at ways to highlight the benefits of kind of the underlying service of energy and how it kind of promotes all the lifelines and acts as a lifeblood for them. So areas around that in terms of resiliency and how microgrids within the community can help that resiliency and get those projects funded would be also of particular interest.
Thank you. And noting that, again, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that we hope to get over the finish line on September 27th would definitely fit very well with the electrification of transportation. It could well be used. We'd have to think about it. It could well be used for some of the demonstration stuff on inter-island air transportation. Okay.
And if I would be remiss if I didn't also speak up for particularly HCAT and Hawaii Island that are working for hydrogen infrastructure as well as hydrogen demonstration projects. So I know HCAT is looking for more funding to be able to move out some of its projects. So,
okay, thanks. Senator VR.
Thank you. While we're talking about electrifying our transportation, if we talk about just for example, Oahu's, if we electrified every car, if everybody was driving an EV, and if right now on a daily usage, we have a maximum, say, of 1,000 megawatts of energy is kind of the average high that we need at any given time. How much electricity will we need to electrify all the cars on Oahu? What's the demand? Is it doubled of what we produce now, or is it fit somewhere in there?
I hope that was to Kirsten, not me, because
yeah, it's actually to Chris.
I'll put over to Rick. I don't know if an estimation has been done on the amount of electric demand that would be done in particular around aviation. No,
not on aviation. I want to talk about just on cars driving around this island. If everybody comes in, we're going to need a lot more electricity.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And I would say that electrification is one of the key tools that we do in decarbonizing ground transportation, but we will need to do other things. It's important that it's just one tool, and we'll need to look at hydrogen, biofuels, mass transit, and really lower the energy intensity, I think is what we're getting at here, in order to achieve our goals, because we can't simply fuel switch and build our way to decarbonize transportation. We really need to think about how we do that.
So if everybody switches to electric vehicles in the next 10 years or whatever is the forecast that they're going to be readily available, we're going to need a lot of electricity. And if our 100% renewable portfolio is 2045, we're going to have not just, right now we're 20% at this moment, 20% clean energy on this island. We're going to need a whole lot more. And I just think that the scaling is really important for kind of a reality check on, and I think it's kind of, excuse me, but I think it's kind of bad we don't have any idea of how much electricity we're going to need to power the cars. I think that's really an important question.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I don't have the number. The total ground transportation is just about equivalent to the power sector right now. So you could think of it essentially as a doubling, but that's all all ground transportation, I believe is a number. And HECO, under their IGP process, integrated grid planning is going on, is looking at a variety of scenarios to forecast how much EV penetration will be by what year, and look what that additional demand is. But the bottom line is it is significant. And I actually have a slide at the back of my talk that makes a couple of comments about it. So we can get you those exact numbers. It really depends on the scenario of the growth and also what happens in regard to continued efficiency on the grid and other changes. But it does move the numbers, and it does move significantly what we need to put on our grids to achieve the decarbonization goals that we're trying to achieve. So, and I'll have one more slide at the end of my talk to address it, but I agree it's a big number, and it does need to be included in the discussion.
Thank you. And if I may, one more part corollary to this is, I'm curious, a gallon of gas, let's just say a gallon of gasoline can power a car for 40 miles. Just pick a number, 35, I don't care what you use, but say a gallon gets you 40 miles. What's the equivalency of, because right now we're still at 80% oil, right? And for powering a lot of stuff on this island at any given time. So if 80% of our electricity is generated out of oil at the moment, how many miles can I go on an equivalent of a gallon of gas if I have an electric car? Because that'll give us a perspective of how much electricity we need, right?
If your electric car is powered off of the grid, and you assume it's oil charged.
No, I'm just assuming, let's say I plug it in and just use whatever number you like. I mean, using whatever numbers we have now, say 70% and 30% clean energy. So 70% right now is of that electricity that's going into my EV is oil, right? So, and it takes an effort to convert the oil into electricity. I'm just curious, you know, if there was a gallon of gas, 1 gallon of gas for the equivalence in oil, would I go farther on an EV or on a combustible engine?
It actually comes down to what type of combustible engine you have.
40 miles a gallon.
At 40 miles per gallon, depending what you, and again, I'm going to show one slide on this, depending what you assume for what the renewable penetration on the grid is. If it's an oil-fired electric car, it's equivalent about a 32 mile per gallon vehicle when you count grid losses and what comes off the grid. If you say that part of that grid is renewable, then that number goes up. But there are some other considerations in that. And actually, I will address it. So if you're willing to hold that question, it might be a good one to come back to at the end.
Thank you. Thank you. I really think this is a key element to the success of this program. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's very.
The short answer, though, is that on average, even if you have a grid 100% powered by fossil fuels, that using that energy to charge an EV battery will on average still be more efficient. And a 40 mile per gallon internal combustion engine is not average.
Okay. It's a great question, Senator. I've wondered the same thing myself as we kind of charge, so to speak, down the road of EV off the grid. Senator Lee?
Thanks. You know, I wanted to, and this is a perfect segue, I think, because I think to the discussion that was just taking place, Gil, you had asked about, you know, if we convert every car to an electric vehicle and electrify the whole grid, what does that look like? And I think if we do that, you know, moving that direction is important, but if we just do that, we've sort of failed, because it's the equivalent of trying to put batteries and PV on every single house without first doing efficiency and reducing our overall load. And what we find in Hawaii, I think, is that, you know, we unfortunately have the worst traffic, we have the worst pedestrian fatalities, we have one of the highest costs of transportation, and we can do a lot in the way that we spend other portions of infrastructure funds on fixing that problem too, to give people those alternatives so we don't have to convert just from cars to EVs, but rather from cars to more efficient modes of transportation altogether, like pedestrian, public transportation, etc. And so just making that transition, I guess the question is to both the Congressman as well as Energy Office and others, you know, is there a piece of this discussion that we can sort of turn into an actionable set of whatever it is coming up, with some of this rare opportunity we have to focus also on, as part of this question of reducing overall emissions and achieving our renewable energy goals, reinvesting in our infrastructure that beyond just, I think, electrification in ways that more efficiently move people around so we can reduce that overall load. And are folks willing to partner on that?
Well, yes, from a federal perspective, that's the point of this discussion for me. And I would repeat that I think that that if we are able to get the infrastructure bill across the finish line, there's going to be a fair bit of discretion to how individual states pursue it. And so a lot of those decisions, I would hope and believe, are going to be made by you all in terms of kind of where you want to take that direction. Just for the interest of time, I will go to Rep. Mariyoshi, and then we will go on.
Thank you. I just had a quick question, and I'm sorry I had to step away to speak to HPD about a district issue. So if you've gone over this, my apologies. But has there been any thought given to unifying the electrical grid between the islands? I know Oahu sucks up a lot of the energy need, but a lot of the renewable energy opportunities, at least the affordable ones, are located on other islands where there's more space, more land, more wind, what have you. I'm wondering how that would factor in, and whether we could get federal funding for that as well.
I kind of feel like we've been to this rodeo before. I'm trying to remember what the detail. Maybe Noe remembers it. She has institutional knowledge of Congress that's way before me. I think we did try to contribute at the federal level to some efforts to support transmission of electricity between islands, and didn't get there at the time. I think that was a function of the economics of the proposal. I personally haven't heard anybody talk about kind of revisiting it. I'd be willing to revisit it. I still think that inter-island connectivity is one of the answers here, but I don't frankly know whether there are initiatives or whether it is realistic at this point. And I think it would be hard to muster the Senator Inoue style earmarks that it would take to actually achieve that. It could be that some of that infrastructure, because again, remember, the infrastructure bill is supposed to be fairly discretionary, but one of its key areas is electrical grid upgrades. And so that would seem to fit into the category, but I'm not sure 2.3 billion, even if you allocated all of it to that would get you there. But it's definitely worth considering. Noe, do you have any institutional recollections on that?
The studies on that were before I was there, but there were studies that the delegation led largely through Senator Inouye's office, in taking a look at the studies and the efficacy of the cables at that time. And then back in around 2008, 2010, there was also another study on inter-island cables. But other than that, I'm not sure that there's been additional studies. Okay.
I would certainly think about it. I don't favor studying, but this might be an appropriate one to revisit with some of that money. Okay, let's go on to Representative Flowen. Thank you so much, and go ahead.
Thank you. Some of this might be repetitive to some of the things we already talked about, so I'll try to move through it pretty quickly. I have just like 2 slides. Whoops. Where do I start my slideshow? Just as kind of a cheat sheet and to give you guys something to look at. So pretty quickly, I was asked to talk about, what the legislature has done in recent years. So I started with 2020, which was, a year where the session kind of got cut in half by COVID. And then when we came back, we were very limitedly focused to dealing with COVID and CARES Act funding, et cetera. But we did pass Act 23. This was the bill that prohibited new or renewed permits for coal power plants by 2023. And so that has been not without its challenges, I think, for Oahu to implement, but with the leadership of the Energy Office, we've been moving forward on discussing how to make sure that the renewable energy projects that are planned stay on schedule. If they all stay on schedule and get implemented in time and come online, then we should be okay to meet that goal. 2021, I think a lot of our focus was surrounding clean transportation. So thanks, Kristen, for your presentation, because now we don't have to explain why that is related to the energy question. But we did pass Act 74 or House Bill 552, and this established clean ground transportation goals for state vehicles to be 100% zero emissions for passenger cars by 2030 and 100% zero emissions for all light duty vehicles by 2035. This bill also updated procurement preferences for medium and heavy duty vehicles so that they would have a preference for zero emissions cleaner vehicles if or when those become more available and more cost effective. And then we also included a requirement to right size the vehicles and the fleets, or not a requirement, but a preference for that in procurement. And the mechanism for accomplishing this is essentially that for all new vehicle acquisitions for state fleets, beginning immediately for passenger cars, they must be zero emission vehicles. And then beginning as soon as practicable, but no later than 2030 for other light duty vehicles. And there is a mechanism for an exemption, et cetera. But this has already been moving forward. DOT has been a real leader, and we think this is a real opportunity to actually save money for the state over the long term on fuel costs, and especially on maintenance costs. And because these vehicles, once they're procured, like they last a lot longer, so you don't need to replace them as quickly. We also passed House Bill 1142 this year. This was building on a bill we passed in 2019 that established rebates for EV charging systems that were available to publicly accessible areas, so like commercial areas, workplaces, and multi-unit dwellings. That was a pretty successful program, but the funding got used up. So this year we shifted 3 cents a barrel tax from other places it was going into a special fund that would be specifically set aside to fund this EV charging system rebates. And I think this amount of funding that's going towards it will be a significant increase. So there's a real opportunity to come back, look at this next session and think about where we might expand, where are the bigger needs. I think multi-unit dwellings, like how do we get EV charging availability into multi-unit dwellings is a challenge that we can spend more time on. And the other piece of that I think we should talk about more is how to help transition our rental car companies and the visitor industry. How do we get chargers at hotels and resorts or at tourist destinations, as well as EVs into rental car fleets. Just really quickly, these are just some other bills we passed. House Bill 1333, this directed HNEI to study renewable energy product, recycling or reuse. We did pass a bill to provide grants for development of sustainable aviation fuels, but to be honest, I think the level of investment that we need in this issue, like the state doesn't have funds to invest in it at this level, and this is somewhere we could really use help with from the federal government, which I know was already discussed. And then we passed another bill, Senate Bill 932, to streamline the GEMS in structure and authorize it for more clean transportation purposes. And also actually some of these amendments allow for leveraging additional sources of funding, so that could include federal dollars. On the right side of this slide is just some bills that have come up or issues that we've worked on in multiple years that actually did not pass this year. So we've talked a lot about energy efficiency already. House Bill 550, which will be reintroduced as a new House bill next year, would have mandated undertaking cost-effective energy efficiency measures for state facilities. So the idea was the state would lead by example. But this idea of building efficiency is a huge one for reaching higher efficiency goals in our energy systems. Not just state buildings. That's a good place to start and a good place to set an example, but we need to do this for commercial and residential facilities also. House Bill 116, this was appliance efficiency. So we actually passed a bill in 2019 to establish the state's first appliance efficiency standards. And this bill would have built on that. It's not, it didn't pass, but we can come back to it. And this is actually also somewhere where, there's appliance efficiency standards at the federal level. Those could be looked at and increased. And then the last two I have on here, we had a bill that would have mandated rooftop solar for new residential construction. And we, multiple bills also looking at EV ready new construction. So I think that the discussion here for me is more surrounding the idea that when we build things in the present that are meant to last for the next 50, 60 plus years, we need to be thinking now about what those need to include to be able to work with our energy systems and transportation systems of the future. And so, those are always not without controversy, because anything that adds cost to housing when we already have a housing crisis, I mean, it's a legitimate concern we have to think about, but that could also be somewhere where, federal incentives or tax credits could be helpful. And actually, I threw carbon tax on here as well, just because we've had this discussion multiple years. It's something that is advocated for by multiple advocacy groups. And, I'm sure we'll continue to have a discussion about carbon tax as far as we can at the state level. But, realistically, and of course, again, can be highly controversial, but, realistically, as an economic tool, it would be a lot cleaner to have federal legislation, not a state by state legislation on this level. So I made my next slide was just kind of a stream of consciousness brainstorming about, how do I switch? Oh, here we go. Where the most help might be able to come from our congressional delegation. And so this is sort of what I thought of. Some of these we've already talked about. One, I think, is maintaining existing renewable energy tax credits. I don't think that now is the time to take those away. Second, and we've talked about this a lot, investing in clean transportation infrastructure, EV charging, electric buses. I've been thinking a lot about school buses because we have a huge school transportation problem in Hawaii right now as well. So that's something where funding could come in helpful if it was available. Investing in energy and water efficiency for buildings. Especially at the residential level, this can also really be an equity issue where, like you said, the weatherization issue in Hawaii is not as, it's not as much focused on as it is on the mainland, but it is true, like, as the summers do get hotter here as well, and more people are running their air conditioning and it's causing more strain on the grid. And, those that are typically at the lower end of the income level have the least efficient, window units and non-insulated louver windows. And if there's, weatherization investments that can help people to make their residences more efficient and save money, that could be not only good for energy efficiency, but also as a, equity for everyone kind of measure. And then we talked about this a little, investing in electric grid transmission to accommodate distributed resources, microgrids, and increased resilience. As Chris Lee mentioned, investing in public transit, I think, can't be overlooked. We don't want to just replace every car on the road with an electric vehicle. We already have traffic problems. We already, want to take the excess pressure off the grid. And then I added here, ensuring that whatever traditional infrastructure investments are included in any infrastructure bill that passes, that it might be helpful if there were stipulations on those funds that new projects were built, keeping in mind, climate issues, increased temperatures, increased, and more frequent, more strong disaster events and things like that, so that those funds are getting spent today, but planning for the future. And then the second list of things I included here was thinking about things where we could use investment that's sort of beyond the scope of what the state of Hawaii would be able to provide, financially. Renewable aviation fuels, geothermal development. I think Hawaii has a lot of potential for geothermal, but the upfront cost of identifying the resource and where it is like the cost of that is a level of risk I think private developers aren't willing to take on. And so we've sort of stagnated on any geothermal development besides in Puna, where it's obvious there's a resource that you don't have to go searching around for it. Offshore wind development, I mean, this might speak a little bit to what Rep. Madayoshi was mentioning earlier about connecting the islands. I'm not sure, there was a long history and I'm not super familiar with it, that I think there were a lot of challenges to doing that. But, as far as the need would mainly be for Oahu, right? The connection would be to benefit Oahu. And it might make more sense to look at offshore wind development as something not quite so far away. But where the federal government could help on this too would be interfacing with the Navy, because some of this would be in federal waters and we don't have state jurisdiction. And then I added to this list investments in, this is kind of a research and development of long duration storage options that will help the grid support more renewables, and carbon capture technology is just a final thing. And some of that carbon capture can be used to create new fuels, but I don't think any of those technologies are commercially viable at this point. So yeah, I kept it pretty brief. I hope that's helpful and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative. I'm sorry, can you just leave that last slide up there? And I maybe I could just comment back to you on a few of those just right now. Okay, so let me just, this is a great list. This is exactly what I would love to have from any of you. What are the areas where the federal government can or should get involved? I totally support the renewable energy tax credits. I don't sense any desire to end them. We have talked about the next couple of issues in terms of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. There are major investments in clean transportation in that bill to include efficiency in buildings, residential and commercial. That's in there. We've talked about the grid. That's a major component of that. Certainly a major component in that bill that I didn't mention particularly, but is definitely in there, is public transportation and public transit. And obviously we all have in various shapes and forms very, very large decisions to make on HART on this island. I'm personally of the view that we should continue HART because I think in 50, 100 years, looking back at today, we will rue the day if we don't. And that obviously impacts our energy future as well in terms of getting people out of cars, and whether they're electric vehicles or fossil fuel driven vehicles. And so it's important to always remember that that's a major contributor, I think, to the energy future. I agree with you on traditional infrastructure investments. I liked your earlier comment about how when we're making investments for 60, 70, 80 years out, even 50 years out, we can't just make assumptions as to the status quo, in the last couple of decades or even today. We've got to guess at what we need into the future. I think one area where this is true is it's across the board in Hawaii, but I think in our Department of Transportation thinking in terms of kind of, where and how we place highways and based on what, I think we can probably stand a little bit more future oriented thinking to think through the transportation system that we want in 25 years, as opposed to just, doing what we have been doing for the last couple of decades. And I think the federal funding is going to be available for us to start to make some of those more future oriented decisions there. So a little bit of a comment there. We talked about renewable aviation fuels. I was a little surprised when you said that geothermal development might be kind of beyond the pale of the state to support from an R&D perspective. I think you're certainly investing in it right now.
No, I don't think beyond, but it would help. I mean, yeah, it would help.
There is geothermal R&D going on. I just spent a couple of days in Utah about 6 weeks ago, during which I was at the University of Utah. An adjunct of which is doing some very, very advanced geothermal R&D funded by the federal government. And my natural question was, well, why aren't we doing that? I mean, we do geothermal. They actually have geothermal, surprisingly.
There's different kinds of geothermal, so that the actual technology is maybe very different.
Right. That's exactly right. I didn't know that. But nonetheless, we probably don't access the geothermal R&D money sufficiently. Offshore wind, I think we all need to focus on that. That is majorly funded by the federal government nowadays. And there are projects. That are ongoing in Hawaii, private funded projects that are reviewing whether an offshore wind development project would be feasible here in Hawaii. They tend to stay off of our grid, as so to speak, because as you already pointed out, they're beyond the state's jurisdictional limits. They're out beyond 3 miles. And you're right that, and those have been vetted through the Navy. So the Navy is definitely involved in them. My understanding of those projects right now is that essentially they are trying to agree with the Navy, which I think has legitimate concerns, by the way. So I think that we should be concerned with what the Navy needs. But there are areas where it may well be feasible and where the Navy may well not have any significant interest, and that's developing. The last I knew, it's still ongoing. My concern there, by the way, is I don't like the idea that the state has nothing to do with offshore wind developments, even if beyond the 3-mile limit. We're clearly impacted by it. And so I'm just kind of a little skeptical of not having it so much on my radar screen. So I try to go out and find out what's going on in that area. Long duration storage, absolutely. There's federal investment there. I think that's a major ingredient as well. And as we all know, the answer to renewable energy and sustainable energy and reliable energy is storage, where we're not where we need to be yet. So completely agree with that. And carbon capture, I did want to note that the carbon tax is very much an issue right now in Congress. That's one of the key questions that we have in the infrastructure bill and in the social infrastructure bill, is whether we're going to finally, enact some form of a carbon tax, carbon dividend, however you want to phrase it. My goal there has been that I want to see I would like to see the proceeds of a carbon tax reinvested directly back into climate change related initiatives and energy, renewable energy R&D, which would benefit us here. I've had somewhat of a problem with some of the proposals that carbon tax dividend should just be paid out on a kind of a uniform basis around the country, or not uniform, but on a progressive basis, if I could put it that way. I'm reluctant to support a general distribution as opposed to having it go back to the purposes that we've intended it to be. Okay, well, anyway, this is a great list, and those are some quick answers back. All right.
I should just mention too, I didn't include hydrogen on the list because I feel like the hydrogen hype is strong and there's a lot of funding for it out there. So, but that's another potential.
Yeah, and Kirsten mentioned that too. And I would love to work with you on that. I frankly don't understand it enough, and I don't understand where I might be able to exploit federal opportunities to fund Hawaii specific hydrogen R&D and utilization. So I invite anybody that wants to work with me on that. I would love to do that. Let's see, where are we on our time? Any other questions for Rep. Loa? Okay, thank you so much, and we will move to Rick. You're on.
Okay, hopefully I can. Is my screen sharing?
Yep.
Okay, I have it on 2 screens, so I want to be sure. Okay, in light of time, I'm going to try to work my way through this quite quickly and leave time for general questions at the end. But a lot of this, I think, been a great introduction to some of the things we're doing going on. So I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can and not, overdo it. So basically, the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, just to clarify, some people, HNA has a lot of visibility these days, but we are part of the University of Hawaii at Manoa. We were also established in statute in 2007. And on this slide, I just wanted to, at a high level, we have activities in 3 big types of areas. We do, research, RDT&E, research, development, testing, evaluation, what you expect a university group to be doing. It ranges from in the lab work to doing work out on the grid that's of general, both state and national interest. Funding for that comes from a wide variety of sources, including Department of Energy, Office of Naval Research. We do are able to use part of the state's barrel tax and a number of other organizations, including the FAA that I'll mention later. We have a very significant activity going now on international partnerships. We have a couple of large grants and are also doing quite well building into USAID programs to build some international partnerships. And in the big vision of reducing global carbon, it's really to take the lessons we're learning in Hawaii and help transition some of that stuff into the Asia Pacific region also helps provide some degree of stability in those regions that they have good energy systems. But I think they're important because those are much larger energy systems than we have here. And I got a couple of examples of things that we are doing to help there. And then the last activity, and most of what I'm going to focus on today, is for a long period of time, more than a decade now, we hadn't been involved in studies, technical studies, more than policy analysis per se, trying to provide guidance to policy on how to reach the goals in Hawaii and what some of the implications and subtleties might be. And I'm going to show one slide on each of those top two things of some of our activities, and then I got just a couple of slides on the back of our recent activity. And some of them do touch on items we've discussed so far. So this is just a sampling of projects we have going on, and people can read, and I'll share these slides with everyone, but there are a couple that I want to point out. Hasn't been discussed yet, but we do provide technical support and effectively manage the Navy's wave energy test site off of the Marine Corps base. It's funded through Navy facilities money, and it's been a significant program since that site was put in place by Navy, I think back in about 2012. Representative, you mentioned the ETIP program that you have supported, and we want to thank you for that. That essentially funds a number of organizations across the country, but the Hawaii connection to that has largely been HNEI. Mark Glick, who's on this call, is our lead on that funding. And kind of a little bit outside of ETIP is we're working with the Molokai community to help them on their sustainable energy plan. All the labs are now kind of seeing the interest in that and reaching back in again. Also some work at the Natural Energy Laboratory, Hawaii. A lot of other projects around. Just one more example in areas, we have a bi-directional EV charging demonstration project, really looking at the technologies to use bi-directional charging and how to manage and optimize it. That just started up here on the UH campus. It's a couple of cars and a couple of chargers. Alternative fuels, we do operate a hydrogen refilling station, 60 kilogram per day potential on the Big Island. I've been working closely with the county to demonstrate hydrogen buses out there. And yes, there is some hype around hydrogen. There is some potential value, but I'll be happy to have a discussion in more detail at a subsequent time. HNEI was one of the early organizations that, you know, this whole hydrogen program started as $1.5 million earmark to 4 universities back in 1987 and 1988. And HNEI was one of those. We've been in it for a long time. We do have funding from the FAA. I definitely agree. Sustainable aviation fuels is beyond the means of the Hawaii. Hawaii can contribute to it. And we are part of the FAA Center of Excellence and do get FAA funding, working on the technology side of how to develop sustainable aviation fuels. And one of our faculty members spends a fair amount of his time working on that. I see I listed the bi-directional charging twice. It's not that big a project. It didn't need to be there. And a new project, we don't do energy efficiency per se, but, and this is a little bit premature the way I worded it, but we're in discussions with the Department of Education. They are actually putting CO2 sensors and other sensors in a large number of classrooms. We have some funding in a project that has started to look much more closely at how to combine the safe environment safe, comfortable, and energy efficient environment. And we're having discussions with them to utilize school classrooms as our model for those projects. And that's something that's just ongoing. I think something in the order of 1,000 classrooms are going to get instrumented. So it's a pretty broad activity. I don't want to belabor the international collaborations. I'll just point out one, the second bullet there in Thailand. We actually work with their largest utility. We help them build a model of the country of Thailand, similar to the models that the utility and HNI have developed for the islands in Hawaii. And that work is now being used by Thailand to look at how to integrate more renewables into their grid. So substantial impact on potential greenhouse gas globally. And a lot of this is by advice, consulting, and sometimes projects in those locations. We have projects in the countries shown, also Indonesia. We're doing work in Papua New Guinea now and in the Philippines as well. And we have that information if anybody's interested. More kind of, I think, aligned to what's most important for today's talk. And the timeline across that top there was just intended to show that we've been doing this for quite some time, since about 2008. And I don't know how to get to quite, I can kind of put my cursor, But there are two studies back here in the early days I wasn't going to point out, but in 2010, we were involved in the Oahu Wind Integration and Transmission Study. That was essentially looking at one-way wind that might have been on Molokai or Lanai that certainly the community didn't support strongly. But was looking at the potential of developing offshore wind, land-based offshore wind resources, if you wanted to call it that, and bringing it to Hawaii. There was a second study in 2013 that looked at a connection, a two-way connection to Oahu and Maui so that both islands could benefit. There could be some reasons to revisit that, certainly as we get resource limited on Oahu, but there are a number of issues other than technical and cost that I think are probably much more significant. I think technical and cost issues could be worked through. I think it's community and public acceptance and other issues that might be there. Anyway, we've had an ongoing relationship, some work done by HNEI, some with consultants under us, some in partnership with the National Renewable Energy Lab. And I just wanted to highlight a couple that are ongoing now and relevant to work that's going on currently. HNEI and our primary consultant now, a small group called Telos Energy, developed some very powerful tools to assess the impact of the AES retirement, in specifically looking at the impact on grid reliability. The models have shown that we can retire AES and that we can replace them with batteries and storage and effectively maintain as good or even better reliability than we have in our current grid. The start dates of some of those projects became an issue. So we have developed a relatively easy to use tool that we have now provided to the PUC and the State Energy Office that allows you to slide the dates around and see what the impact and reliability might be. And that's a tool we're just trying to get a few people to look at it first, but we can make it available to a broader range of people. Something that might be, this is kind of brand new. It's not gone public before, but we did do an assessment of what if we converted the AES plant to biomass. And this is not us proposing this. AES has proposed it. It's kind of been identified as not really of significant interest. We think we have some analysis that says we at least need to take a very careful look at that and what its potential is. We're actually scheduled to present that work to the PUC and the State Energy Office. I think it's next week. I might be 1 week after that, but in the next couple of weeks. Things that have already been mentioned, we are doing some greenhouse gas analysis to request of the PUC. That one's been a little slow, but it is ready now for community review. We are looking at recycle of the PV and batteries to report back to the legislature. And something else we'll be coming out with is there's always the debate of how much rooftop. I mean, rooftop is somewhat constrained by siting, but it's also, we need to reach in and have this very high resolution controls of rooftop. And we actually believe that you can max, or if not maximize, you can get the vast majority of the benefit of that rooftop PV with what I would call dumb controls, very simple control and operational strategies of that rooftop PV that negates the need to have real-time measuring and monitoring of all those systems, real-time control like you have on the utility scale systems. And so that's information we're writing up at this time and hope to get out in the community. So those are just kind of examples. These projects tend to be funded partly by DOE and ONR, but they also, the barrel tax money we get goes into cost sharing needs to get it to the level we need to make it valuable to the state. So a couple of slides being forward looking, and Kirsten did a great job of showing where we are. She talked a little bit about the stage 1 and stage 2. Plotting things a little bit differently. This is looking at Oahu, and I'm focusing on Oahu now. We have similar work on the other islands, but Oahu is clearly the one that's most difficult to get to the higher penetration levels. It is about 70% of our energy use. So a lot of the efforts focused on Oahu. But if you look at the bars up through stage 2, it shows waste, biofuels, wind, and this is the energy that gets delivered to the grid. It shows that once stage 1 and stage 2 with the storage on those stage 1 and 2 projects are implemented, we will be at about 40% renewable energy. That's the actual percent of energy delivered to grid. On the RPS basis, that is slightly over 50%, as Kirsten mentioned, because the rooftop is a few people have brought up many, many times, does get double counted just because of the formula that's in there. But it's 40% real, about 50% RPS. Within kind of the discussion going on with the integrated grid plan and utility, there's a number of scenarios that have come forth, some involving more heavily solar, some with biomass, some focused on offshore wind, some mixes. We're really going to need some of everything. But we took a look at what if we went through stage 2 and then added in another 400 megawatts of utility scale PV. And it's actually more than that at the DC level. It's more like 550 or 560 DC. So more panels than inverters, and an additional 150 megawatts of behind the meter rooftop. And what we found, and it's kind of the third bullet to the right, is that if you put 4-hour storage on those utility scale systems and kind of the equivalent amount of storage that tends to be going into the rooftop systems now, that 4-hour storage is both necessary and sufficient to shift the load, minimize transmission congestions and not require additional transmission development, and facilitate some additional thermal unit retirement without any significant curtailment of that solar. So we can go through stage 1, stage 2, and an additional big chunk of solar without curtailment. And it's largely brought about because of the power that's introduced to manage the grid by all of the batteries going in both at the utility scale and the grid scale. But up to this point, 4 hours is sufficient. At some point of even higher penetration, longer duration storage is needed. And then there's questions about what's the right strategy going forward. The last bar to the right, which is, you know, and I will say not even AES saw this before the talk, and I apologize for that. But we looked at what if the AES was converted to biomass, and we would get an almost instantaneous jump of approximately 20% in our percent of renewables on the grid. So if we went through stage 1, stage 2, stage X, it doesn't require major transmission infrastructure upgrade, and converted that bio, we would be at just over 72% real energy on the Oahu grid, which puts us a little bit over 90% on the RPS. That is a remarkable potential with something that to me looks quite doable. Now, that much solar is going to require a lot of work with the community. There are siting issues, but it is looking at regions that seem to have the ability to accommodate it if it's approached in the right manner with the community. So these goals are far, far in excess of, I think, what anybody thought could be done a few years ago. Well, maybe a lot of people thought we could, but with my engineering background, I was a little more conservative than what I expected. This is really significant. A little bit more conservative approach. I have one last slide, and this kind of gets to some of the discussion that's going on so far, is that a significant fraction of our energy use and a significant amount of our greenhouse gases do come from other sectors besides transportation. And so I don't want to go through this, you know, and I said approximately 60% of our carbon emissions are from transport, and this includes ground and aviation. So continued reduction of those emissions requires us to go substantially beyond what we do with the grid. And again, I think EV electrification done appropriately will have an impact, but as has been said, we really do need to go beyond just electrification. We need to look at all new ways to address this if we want to get down. One point that generally, you know, takes some explanation and people don't like it so much when I say it, is at the current time, even with 60 and even with 80% renewables on our grid, introduction of EVs does not significantly reduce our state's carbon footprint. And that's a statement that is sometimes a little complicated. So I tried to put a little graphic together. And so let's assume we get to where I say we can get through our stage X of solar. So I haven't put the biomass plan on. And so if I look at my grid, I'm at approximately 60% green energy. And I got 4 barrels of oil coming in, and I got 6 barrels equivalent of green energy. And my transportation is still black. I'm still burning oil to power my car, burning gasoline. And there's some number of vehicles on the car, but this is a reasonable, and the number of barrels isn't exactly right. At the current time, and it's the studies I showed from the previous slide, all of that electricity can go on the grid. So whether it's on an individual rooftop, or it's at the utility scale, or it's on a business and powering that business, it's meeting the overall load of the island, but 100% of that energy without curtailment can go on our grid. If I now reach in and I take out half of those cars and substitute electric vehicles, they've got to be powered. I can assume that green energy is going to come from the grid and power those vehicles. And that could be green energy from somebody's individual rooftop or from the utility scale. So my fleet is now, half green because I got half gasoline powered cars and half clean cars. But I still have a load, the rest of the load on the grid, the industry, the residential businesses that needs their 10 barrels equivalent of energy. So the 2 barrels of oil that were going to the car have to go now into the grid to meet that existing demand that was already there. So I haven't changed my total number of green and black barrels. I've changed where they go. This is not to say EVs are not good. It's not to say that we shouldn't be pursuing it. It's to say, even if we get to these 70, 80, 90% numbers, we need to go significantly beyond that if we're going to electrify other sectors and have it significantly reduce our carbon footprint. So we need to be EV ready. There's certainly higher efficiency has been stated than existing average cars that are on the road, but it means, it's a little bit, it's focus. I'm trying to say we really need to focus on getting our renewables on the grid as fast as we can, and maybe even going beyond what we think is a 100% goal. And maybe it's only 80% on the grid and more of it's into the transportation sector. But we need to balance that where we go so that we green all sectors together. And with that, I will stop and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I realize, and happy to make materials available on any of this.
Thank you so much, Rick. That was great. And Senator Rivera probably has a question on your last slide. He's looking very intently at it. So a couple of just comments back to you and one question. I think, well, first of all, I hope everybody's following the chat. There's a lot of good stuff going on in the chat. One thing that was in there, both Kirsten and Noe corrected me accurately, that the state is involved in offshore wind projects. So there is that nexus back to the state's involvement through the state administration. I do think it flies under the radar a little bit too much with our broader folks in our state legislature and county council. So I would just encourage you to take a look at what's happening beyond the state's jurisdiction, even if there is a connection back to the state. I'm happy that you reinforced the comment I made earlier, Rick, that a lot of this funding of what you're working on is actually DoD related funding. Again, I would make the point that many of the energy projects throughout our country and here are funded. That at the military level, they have an interest in doing that. And if there are other opportunities where other branches of the service who are involved as well can participate. By the way, they also do some pretty advanced climate change related studies. They've done their own coastal resiliency studies for the military bases and planned to what to do about it, frankly, much more than many other parts of our country. Your comments on storage, I thought, were really interesting. And the question that I had as you talked about the storage scenarios and how they could really contribute, I guess I asked the question, is there anything unique about Hawaii from a storage perspective where we could actually chase federal support for, battery or other storage R&D that somehow Hawaii has a niche? I mean, it strikes me that that's one of those areas that's fairly generic. So we would be competing really with everybody else from that perspective, or maybe we, yield that particular area to somebody else, a little bit like aviation fuel, but I didn't know whether that was the question or not. So let's see. And then finally, Rick, just those are observations. And then to your question, to my question at least, what do you think are the areas where the federal government can actually step it up from a support perspective for Hawaii?
Yeah, so a couple of questions. So one partly to Kirsten's chat real quickly, so don't forget it, and I meant to mention. So in that equivalent move of barrels there, there is some net gain in efficiency in generating the electricity on the grid as opposed to burning it in a car. But if you look at the balance, it's a relatively modest gain. Actually, changing until we have the excess renewables on the grid, changing to a high efficiency vehicle, although that's not what's typically on the road, such as a hybrid, would actually have a bigger impact on our carbon footprint. So there is a net savings relative to the relatively low CAFE standard car that's on the road. By our estimates, and other people put it out, it's about a 32 or 33 mile per gallon break-even point on that. So if you're driving a car that's better than 33, 35 miles per gallon, you're as good as charging EV off the grid. One other point is this is a Hawaii specific argument. In other parts of the nation, when you take a car off of the gasoline, you are using natural gas or nuclear or hydro in greater percentages. You're not now burning more oil to make up for the gasoline that has been displaced. It's two very different systems. And so this is a Hawaii unique. In terms of the resilience, one other point is in the money. And first of all, in terms of the DoD money, I want to thank our congressional delegation across both House and Senate on all sides. A good bit of the money we've been able to get is because of it's been a plus up that's gone into the various services. We've been able to tap in that very efficiently, particularly on the Navy side, which comes through the Office of Naval Research. And so that's been a very great relationship, but it's been very dependent on the strong support we've gotten from our congressional delegation. So I want to thank everybody on it. And they did recently, from that same money that is called the Alternate Energy fund a sea level rise center here on campus to be looking at some of the climate change issues. And in fact, in our last two proposals to the Office of Naval Research, resilience of the grid, particularly the Oahu grid, is one of the areas we've been able to add because of their interest in that. So it is going from just energy to reliability and resilience, as that's kind of so critical to DoD. One of the things that we are, I'm going to be real frank, one of the things we're constantly fighting, battling, pursuing, is a lot of money is going into these programs, and an awful lot of money goes into the national labs that could be used very, very effectively, not only at the university, by other organizations, state energy offices, partnerships with utilities, partnerships with industry. And a lot of times the lab consultants are flown in, they fly out, a report's delivered, but we haven't built the local infrastructure. So one of my repeated comments have been, and maybe it's not in appropriations, it's in report language, things that can help the funds get to where they're used and build that local infrastructure would be extremely valuable. I mean, I'll give more thought to specific topical areas, but there's actually a lot of money, but it's sometimes difficult to get it to where I think it could be most valuable.
I would invite your draft report language. Let's cut to the chase on that. I think that's something that we can work on.
And if I missed any questions, feel free to come back.
Okay, Senator Rivera.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. And thanks, Rick. You kind of validated my supposition on that it's shifting energy if we shift EV to the grid. So I would just like to ask, maybe Hawaii Energy Office can share with us, maybe as a follow-up, what are the projected levels of energy that will need to be generated in, say, 5-year increments going forward, and with and without the migration of electric vehicles. So clearly, we're going to need a lot more electricity to power electric vehicles, which means we're going to need a lot more alternative energy. So I'd like to see those numbers in some sort of chart or format going forward.
If I may, Senator Rivera, we'll definitely attend to that, but that is part of the integrated grid planning process at the PUC that multiple stakeholders are participating in. And so that is the nut that's trying to be cracked. right now, but I'll
But
try and
surely
put
there
something together.
there must be some
Yeah.
estimates or some rough
Yeah.
numbers, and I don't want to take
Yeah.
you guys' time anymore, but I think that's really the essence of the whole argument, or
One of the initial
or what
steps
has
of-
to be done
oh,
to get there. Yeah.
One of the very initial steps of the IGP work is to forecast what load will be, and it looks at existing demand, it looks at rooftop PV or distributed resources, it looks at increases in energy efficiency, and then it looks at EV. And there are a number of lines and scenarios on their charts of what EV penetration might be by year, which is converted directly into kilowatt hours required. So those numbers are out there. They vary widely depending on the assumptions, but there are ranges, and those charts are publicly available, and we can also pull them up and make them available to you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rick. We are coming down fast on our time. This has gone by fast and furious. I would like to give an opportunity to other folks to chime in, starting with my colleagues that have not chimed in yet, if you'd like to, from the state legislature. Rep. Martin, I think you're the one on the phone that hasn't. Do you have anything you want to add or ask?
Gosh, not really. I just wanted to comment that, the offshore wind project for Oahu has shifted to my district. I think they were denied by the military, their plan in the Diamond Head area. So they're shifting their sites to the Waimanalo area. And I think in order for the community to not oppose it, there has to be a direct linked benefit for the community. And because they will naturally oppose just about everything otherwise. And I was told by the private developers that they said, well, we could maybe fund like a town, some sort of town hall gathering place. I said, no, we can fund that. The state legislature, it has to be tied to it. And they said, we can't do that. And so that kind of thing, I think, has to be worked through in order to get community buy-in, because we will see the offshore, we will see the structures offshore, and it is a Native Hawaiian community, and they're activated, and so I think that early education isn't enough. There has to be benefits.
Thank you, Representative. Well said. Okay, we've got a number of our colleagues and partners in non-government here. Can I suggest that each of you, if you'd like, take 30 seconds, if we can do that. Always hard for us all to do 30 seconds, and just like, what are the snapshots of what you think the feds, me and the rest of your federal government should be doing right now? What do you want us to do? So I'm gonna just go with your, raise your chat hand if you'd like to have a quick bite at that. Okay, Polly, go ahead.
Congressman, aloha, and thank you to the many representatives as well today. This is Polly Shaw of Plus Power here. We're the developer of the 185 megawatt Kapolei energy storage project. Congressman Case, I really want to thank you for your support of energy storage generally and for robust energy storage appropriations funding. That funding has huge benefit to Hawaii's RD&D on energy storage applications. But my one ask from the energy storage industry, of which I'm also on the board of the Energy Storage Association, is your help to pass the energy storage ITC in the reconciliation package. That would deploy vast megawatts of renewables and energy in Hawaii. And thank you in particular for co-sponsoring the Energy Storage Tax Incentive Act of 2019. As the process moves along with the bipartisan package and reconciliation, we know you are concerned about the price tag, but passing the storage ITC now would create the grid reliability and system balancing in Hawaii to greatly deploy much more customer-sited and utility-scale renewables. It is the bedrock of achieving America's and Hawaii's 100% decarbonization goals, electric transportation, domestic manufacturing, reliability, and resilience goals. ITC-driven storage creates the grid reliability that attracts more high-energy users to come and invest in Hawaii, and it also brings local communities across Hawaii that new revenue and jobs from accelerated projects. I know others on the call will speak about the concerns that we share about the threat of increased solar and storage import tariffs. So I'll leave that to them. Thank you for this roundtable, and thank you for your help to try to pass the storage ITC and the reconciliation package.
Thank you so much, Polly. As you know, all of the committees of jurisdiction we're supposed to report today. So I don't exactly know where that ended up in the committee of jurisdiction. I'll go try to track it. I would observe to you that, yes, I am concerned about worsening national debt and deficits. And that's thus my concern in reconciliation. But to the extent that this is in the climate change side of things, which I think it is, I and most of the rest of us understand that that's an investment of our national resources to get there. So that falls in a little bit of a different category for me. Let's see, who else? Anybody else? Just raise your hand if you want to weigh in here. Anybody? I got to go to another screen. I don't see anybody. Did I miss anybody? Okay.
Representative.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you don't mind, this is.
Yeah, Robert. Robert, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Ben, for jumping in front of you. Just real briefly, thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue. A lot of fascinating conversation. Again, reiterating continued support for the ITC. That has brought in a lot of economic activity in Hawaii, and Hawaii probably disproportionately benefits from that. And it's going to be critical to speeding up and accelerating our renewable energy adoption. The second thing, I'd like to thank your office, and it's a relatively small, low-hanging fruit point. The Lawrence Berkeley just came out with a report just literally today, showing that the cost of installing solar is $3.80 per watt in the United States, which is roughly triple almost every other country. The cost of permitting and interconnection creates huge additional costs on these installations that everyday residents pay for when they install rooftop solar, et cetera. So supportive programs like Solar App, which is a Department of Energy funded program, which creates tools for local administration and local offices to be able to use, is critical to lowering that cost and making renewable energy cheaper for everyone to adopt.
Thank you very much, Robert. Understood all of that, and fully supportive. Ben?
Thanks, Congressman. Real briefly, I know a lot of folks are thinking about it, including yourself and your staff very much, but on the subject of equity and incentives and benefits, if there's any vehicles that we can utilize to assure that some of these benefits go where they're really needed, as opposed to where they're just helping somebody accrue more wealth, it is greatly appreciated. I think the example of EV tax credits is coming up, and we saw what happened with PV tax credits. Initially, it was very, very instrumental in motivating the industry to move forward and getting that off the ground. But then it really did become something that was a little bit more of a giveaway to folks who already had money, because it was a tax credit and not. It didn't really open up to folks with limited means. And I'd hate to see the same thing happen or continue to happen with EVs. And I think there's plenty of workarounds where we can continue to accelerate rooftop development and other things without just giving away, I think, giving away to all incomes, the incentives that the federal government puts out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's a really important point. We are definitely trying to work through that in Congress to fairly and equitably distribute the investments that we're making and assure that they get to the communities most in need. I would observe to you that, again, there will be a fair bit of discretion at the state county level to do that here. And by the way, I just make a quick comment back to, I think it was Rep. Lowen, if I'm not mistaken, who was discussing some of the issues around I think the way you were saying it was how do we facilitate development of rental cars in a way that is sustainable for our tourists. And I think there's a much broader question that we all need to deal with, which that presumes that we want to continue to grow tourism in the way that it has. And certainly in the ways that we make these decisions, we can also make a decision about what kind of future we want for tourism. EVs is a good kind of test of that proposition. If all we're going to do is to try to put out charging stations to facilitate more and more rental cars for tourists, well, that's one way to do it. But another way to do it is to ask, well, exactly how do we want to facilitate future tourism in the state, and then match to that. So I just offer that, since, you know, if we have 250,000 plus tourists here a day, that obviously impacts or more, that obviously impacts our energy policy. And I don't want the, you know, cart before the horse. That's my own editorialization on this subject. Mathia, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. Aloha and mahalo for the opportunity to join this roundtable. It's been an interesting set of information shared, and appreciate all the state representatives as well from their perspectives. My name is Mathia Larkin, and I'm responsible for national solar and storage development at Clearway Energy. As some of you may know, Clearway has 110 megawatts of operational projects on Oahu, and we're mid-construction on 75 megawatts of additional PV projects that also include 300 megawatt hours of battery storage. So we have we're serving Hawaiian Electric and customers across Hawaii, and we're excited to continue that development. And we appreciate your leadership, as a number of others have noted, in some of the national issues that do impact Hawaii-based projects and your constituents. I will jump very quickly, because I know we are actually over time now, to the two items, one which Polly mentioned, in addition to the battery storage tax credit, which we also support. The extension of the ITC for PV is also one that I would put critically. And to put a really fine point on it, I think that there is a direct connection to the price of electricity that we can sell to Hawaiian Electric, and that would be passed along to customers in Hawaii with the extension of a PV ITC. That's one note. And then on the second note, I would just to sort of follow on to what Polly was mentioning around the tariff concerns that we have as an industry. The supply chain, both for battery and for PV, is enormously, it's a significantly global supply chain. For PV specifically, in the context of the AD/CVD tariffs that are under consideration at the Department of Commerce, only 20% of domestic supply can actually be, only 20% of demand could be achieved with domestic supply of PV today. And these kinds of tariffs have significant ramifications, both on projects of our size, but also on residential and commercial industrial scale projects, by limiting the choices that you have, and therefore limiting competition across quality products that might be available to provide more cost-effective solutions to Hawaiian customers. And so I think in both of those cases, across whatever scale of PV deployment, and I think setting a precedent also for, given the supply chain parallels that we see between PV and battery, that we really encourage you to reach out to the Department of Commerce and ask them to not proceed with the process that they've undertaken here around the AD/CVD.
Thank you. Where's the primary source of import for what you're talking about? Is it China?
The companies themselves, many of them are Chinese, but the supply chains themselves are diverse across Asia. And I think that that's one of the challenges as the PV industry in particular has grown and matured, that those supply chains and manufacturing bases have spread across numerous countries, even if a company is headquartered in China. And in fact, you know, one of our projects that is under construction today is sourcing from a Chinese manufacturer who utilizes US-based polysilicon and then creates cells and wafers in other countries around Asia. And it just so happens that you know, may not be impacted, but that is a purely sort of that was not planned. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I heard both of you. I have not focused in on this issue. So let me go do that right away. I just don't know enough about it. We clearly have whole range of very, very large decisions to be made on supply chain vulnerabilities, especially for critical infrastructure in this country. Much of that is focused on whether we want our critical supply chain origin to be countries that appear to be potential opponents or our opponents, China in particular. And so these are huge issues, and I had not focused, in all honesty, on the implications for that debate on the development of renewable energy in Hawaii. So I just hadn't traced that all the way through. So let me go do that. So that's one to do for me and my staff.
And we'd be happy to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we'd be happy to spend more time with internal experts to give you more perspective on that, if you felt that would be useful, to give you more detail around
I'd like
where
to
the supply chain
understand
is
the
located
issue
and things like that.
Lieutenant Bernard, maybe you could just put your email in the chat here. Hey, we're over by about 7 minutes. I think we could go on for quite a while. This has been, from my perspective, incredible. I think we just kind of scratched the surface. I kind of jotted down a number of things that I learned from each of the folks that presented and from the questions today. And it's actually a pretty long list. I won't go down it. Some of the key areas. I'm always just struck at how much we're doing here in Hawaii that is quite advanced in the country and in the world. And I think, one of the things that I observe when I spend 2 hours with all of you is that we don't tell that story nationally quite as much as perhaps we could or should, both because we should be proud of it and also because, frankly, it helps us with federal funding. And so that's certainly one takeaway for me is how do we assemble what we're actually doing here and show that we're a leader of the country that deserves to be supported. We do have significant federal support here right now. We do have a larger share than kind of the average across the country. But again, I think we should always strive to support where we're trying to get to as both for ourselves and for our country and world as much as we possibly can. So for me, the takeaway is that there's a lot to be done still with each and all of you to kind of refine what kind of requests, what kind of efforts, what kind of joint approaches we could take to facilitate the federal support of what we're trying to do. Or sometimes we remove federal obstacles. So it's not all just a matter of federal funding. Sometimes it's a matter of the feds getting in our way. So I particularly want to focus on that. I've got a couple of other very specific areas to follow up here. In particular, many of you talked about aviation fuel. I had not focused on that as a critical need of research right there. Like I said, I've got my list here, but I'm going to stop there. I hope that you will all follow up, tonight or tomorrow or whenever you thought, well, I should have said that, or I'd like to say that. Lieutenant Bernard has his email in here, and just reach me through him. I'm happy to get back on the phone with any of you as our schedules permit to follow up on this. So just let us know through my office. We're happy to do that. And other than that, I really thank you for your time, your effort, your commitment, your partnership again. And with that, I'm going to sign off and look forward to our next chapters. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.